there's not one culture that's superior to another. Even though we might be influenced by the storytelling and narrative of a certain culture, such as people that speak English, for example, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only way to be, and that's not the only way we should be. And so I encourage people to explore different stories, explore different cultures. Go out there and speak to people. You don't have to be best friends with everyone or have friendships with everyone. If you have friendships, that's great, because we know that friendships promote cultural diversity and increase our cultural capital. I guess I encourage education and really connecting with people, not just reading books either, but really going out and connecting with people in different ways.
Lexigo presents The Native Experience with your host, Brian.
Hello, world. This is Brian from Lexigo.com, and you are listening to the Native Experience Podcast, the show that is all about diversity. Our goal in this podcast is to go beyond translation and localization and discuss creating truly native experiences for diverse audiences. Today, we are talking with Lisa Trabuzio, co-create facilitator with Lexigo, and also manager at Lotus Consulting. So I'm wondering if you are tired, by the way, of spending hours transcribing audio or video content. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Scribe really quickly before we get into our discussion with Lisa. This is an important thing. It's an effortless solution for transcription, subtitling, and translation. With Scribe, you can transcribe speech to text in record time, create on-brand subtitles instantly, and translate and create subtitles across 171 languages in minutes. So if you'd like to check that one out, head on over to lexigo.com/scribe. We have such a great episode today. We're going to be getting into an awesome discussion. I cannot wait to share this with you. So make sure to stick around for the entire episode. Let me tell you a little bit about Lisa. She is a social worker who has had 25 years of experience in the field of equal opportunity, lobbying governments to address poverty, social disadvantage, racism and discrimination, and policies which promote oppression of Australian communities. Lisa has worked in the fields of multiculturalism, disability and youth and family services, and brings with her an experience and knowledge working in community welfare, media, local government, and the education sectors. She's traveled through Asia and the Middle East, working with human rights organizations, promoting cross-cultural exchange, education, and understanding of human rights. She has a particular focus on the context of communities and how policies, as well as cultural norms, affect access to services and opportunities. She has a Bachelor of Science in Psychology, Bachelor of Social Work, graduate certification in Creative Arts Therapy, and a Master's in Islamic Studies. And she was also a member of the Equal Opportunity Employment Network. We have such a great conversation that I got to wonder if this is going to need to turn into a 2-episode conversation. So what we may do is we may bring on Lisa to talk a little bit about, some of the stuff that she's, we'll see how this goes, but maybe she'll come back again in the future to talk about more because there's so much to get into. So let's have some fun and let's rock this episode. Lisa, welcome to the Native Experience. Thank you for joining me. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Brian, for having me.
Of course. Well, I'm excited to get to know you a little bit. Tell us about yourself. Tell us what you do. Talk about yourself personally, professionally, and then also what are you nerding out on currently right now too?
Thanks so much, Brian. So my name's Lisa Trabuzio and I'm the manager of Lotus Consulting. So Lotus Consulting is an organization that promotes intercultural dialogue and cross-cultural communication, but also working with diverse communities around how do we understand each other, how do we reduce barriers between us, and how do we effectively communicate in a diverse world. I'm a qualified social worker who's worked for about 25 years working with communities from all different life stories, but my specialty is around multiculturalism and the rights of people from diverse cultural and faith backgrounds, and really honouring the multicultural story here in Australia, especially in the way in which Australia has always been diverse, of course, when we look at Aboriginal communities until today. So I'm really passionate about promoting cultural diversity and looking at the rights of people in particular. So yeah, it's a little bit about Lotus Consulting and a little bit about my work. I've worked in the mental health field, so worked with people with mental health issues, also people from all different backgrounds that perhaps need a little bit of support in accessing services and a little bit of support in getting a voice and their voices heard in the Australian kaleidoscope. I'm nerding out on a few things at the moment. So I'm really excited to be part of an Italian women's theatre group, an Italian women's writers group, where we're promoting and increasing the visibility of Australian Italian women in Australia through storytelling, because we often find that in the media in particular, or in the Australian literature field, there's not a lot of stories of people from ethnic backgrounds promoting those stories. So it's really exciting, especially from a women's perspective as well. Yeah.
Oh, that's fun. Cool.
Well,
so theater group.
Fun.
Yeah. So you're acting and I mean, do you have anything specific that you enjoy doing when it comes to the acting?
We do like short scenes. So we sort of write some scenes, and then from there, what comes out around some of the themes that have come up for women. It's not always happy. It can be themes that have layers to them around shame and stigma, things that women go through that perhaps, are not always spoken about. But we also just play games, just try to move our bodies around and try to move the energy around. So
nice.
Yeah, it's good. Not just always sitting down and writing.
No, that's great. It's neat you're presenting the important information, in a way that's through entertainment too, because you look at Star Trek, a very popular, not just a TV show anymore. It's like a way of life for certain people, But you look at that and you look at Gene Roddenberry and how his idea was to basically just create a story that had important messages in it. And diversity was one of his biggest things, of course, because he was the first to do it in television back in the day. It's interesting, but he wasn't doing it in a way that was like, hey, okay, let's sit down and have a serious conversation. It was, here's entertainment with very important subjects. And so I think it's a very effective means to do that. So I'm glad you're doing that I'm assuming that's kind of how you're doing it with the theater group, is you're showcasing it's through entertainment, but it's important.
It's sort of like aim it, but not name it. So you're aiming to do something, but it's not so direct. It's more nuanced. So
that's neat.
And it's also just being authentic in promoting those stories that are often not always heard.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, cool. Well, good to know just a little bit about you. So, and it sounds really neat what you're doing with Lotus, which we'll get into in just a minute. What inspires you? I know this is kind of a huge question. This could go on for probably 30 minutes in itself, but I'm just kind of curious.
Oh, what inspires me? Seeing people help other people really inspires me. So the caring professions, the community care sector, people who are alleviating harm across the world. So there is an organisation that I've been looking into, which is rescuing farm animals. And
nice.
It just inspires me because, I don't know, it's those little acts of kindness that are important to recognise and to see in the world. Often we have these hero stories where people are clapped because they kick a ball around, which of course I love soccer and I'm watching the Women's World Cup, which inspires me as well. I think sport and art and all those beautiful things, but there's also people that are hidden angels behind the scenes that are often forgotten, like personal care workers or nurses and doctors and social workers and people that are hardly noticed. And when I see that kind of work, I do get inspired by that as well. I'm also inspired by animals and the natural world. I've got 2 little puppies that they just inspire me. They're just simple, but also just beautiful from the heart. So heart energy inspires me a lot. That's really cool. One of the other podcasts that I host, this one's actually my personal one. It's called The Real Brian Show, but we were talking about this on a recent episode that, things have changed a lot since COVID. I have sadly noticed a lot more selfishness and negativity and stuff like that than probably I ever have after, kind of in this last calendar year, basically. And so it's kind of sad because then I got to think, we got this conversation about how are we going to overcome this? This is not okay. And so looking for those, as I call them, superhero stories, people that they're doing things, even if it's small, like, hey, someone held the door open for you and said hello and smiled at you. And that's it. It could be that small, but you know what? It makes your day. But that's inspirational. And that's the kind of thing, like you talk about what inspires you. And, I'm in the same boat too, where those kind of things inspire me too, because it seems to be less and less these days. And so it was this encouragement for us to look up from ourselves, look at other people, be a blessing to others, unleash our superhero that's within us and inspire others, let others inspire us, that kind of thing. We were kind of getting into that, a little bit into that conversation. So it's funny you bring that up right now. I think it's kind of a very important thing, especially right now in this day and age. Yeah, I think so. And I don't always do that myself. You have your days where you just you just want to curl up and not do anything. And, we're all human and we all have complex stories. And of course, COVID has definitely affected the way that we relate to ourselves and others.
Yeah.
And I think we're all just trying to reconnect in any way that we need to reconnect. But when I see people tirelessly working to alleviate harm amongst others, that's what inspires me, because you can't always do that. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not always something that you can do naturally. So to consciously do that, I find that really inspiring. And I don't do that, but when I see other people do it, I think it's amazing.
Well, it sounds like you do that a little bit based on what you were talking about. And you're right, though. It is a conscious, intentional thing. I was even just thinking of the word hustle before we got on this call right now. Am I hustling to do what I need to do? Am I hustling to be successful? Am I hustling to be a blessing to others? Because like you said, it's not natural for us to tirelessly serve others. It takes work, it takes intention, and it's exhausting at times, but it's also rewarding. So, But I know you do that. I know you do that with your work. Just even reading about what you do and hearing just briefly what you already said.
Yeah, I studied social work, so I guess we kind of identify as skilled helpers.
Yeah.
And so we learn the skills to help people. And that's what we study at university. And that's how the profession came about, by committing to the values of social justice. And there's a lot of work out there to do. And there's a lot of different ways you can engage with this kind of work. And so with my career, I engaged in complex mental health for people living with schizophrenia, and they often are in their rooms and often, just stay there. So to visit them, it was a privilege to be involved in people's lives and to help them learn those life skills around cooking and transport and socializing and being involved in society. It is a privilege, but it's also, you carry those stories with you. But it also informs the work that I do around systemic change, because when you look at the structures of our society, they're not always inclusive. Yeah. And so I've worked, with people living with a disability. So when you look at the simple thing of a wheelchair, can a wheelchair get into that space? And so that's how I kind of look at the world now, through how do our systems and organizations, how are they inclusive for people living with disability, people who speak a language other than English, need a language support to access services, or people. So in the last 5 years, I've worked in the aged care space, so older people, and how their voices can be heard as well. So those stories I carry around with me, and you help people, but then you realize that systems need to also adapt to people's needs. So that's what Lotus Consulting is about as well. And that's the kind of work I've been doing with Lexico. How do we have flexible and adaptive ways to engage with people? It could be in their own homes, could be through different means of radio or letter writing or podcasts, for example, how people have a voice. So it's just thinking flexibly and creatively and lateral thinking to really look at the way that we can become inclusive, I think. And I think a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work.
Of course.
If you look at the history of Australia, often, we ignore those people who have a language other than English. We know that in Australia there's over 350 languages spoken and around over 170 or 180 different faiths practiced in Australia. And how do we celebrate and leverage off that beautiful diversity? But often you don't see that in the media or in our government processes or systems. Where are we trying to promote a certain way of life? Are we trying to get people to be a certain way? And they're the conversations I like to have around, challenging the narrative in Australia.
That's great. I mean, it's amazing when you think about the one size fits all thing. It's just one size doesn't ever fit all. If you think about it, I mean, everybody's different. Everybody has their uniquenesses, their needs, their whatever, And so I think it's a really good thing to be help. I mean, you think about it too, and I would assume that most groups, organizations, businesses, whatever, fill in the blank, are probably just unaware that they're not being fully accommodating. Some, maybe it's intentional, but I would say most probably are just unaware. So I think it's good that you're actually bringing this to attention. Now, I'm curious, looking at the word diversity, what do you think about it in general? What do you think it means? Do you like that word, etc.?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. And I think this has been spoken about in the diversity, equity, and inclusion field, because there's roles in organizations which are called diversity and inclusion consultant roles. And it's been challenged because the whole diversity and inclusion space, it's still evolving in Australia, but if you look at those roles and that kind of sector in America, it sort of was birthed from the civil rights movement and the rights of African Americans around affirmative action. You know, how do we kind of encourage people to get employment that have faced discrimination? So it's highly political. In Australia, people have challenged this idea of diversity as if it puts whiteness in the centre and everything else is on the periphery. It's good to have these conversations. But for me, diversity is about power and privilege as well. So who has privilege in our society and who has more opportunities to be in leadership roles and to shape the way that organisations and systems make decisions? How do we kind of encourage a more equal platform? But if we take that away around equal opportunity and just look at diversity without those kind of new loaded understandings of it, it's about that we're all unique and we all have a different story. And it touches upon things like language diversity or faith diversity, but also, you know, the way in which we live our lives, whether we have a disability or not, you know, our mental health issues or not, but also our gender diversity, our sexual diversity, our suburban diversity. You know, if you look at Melbourne, you've got one suburb to another suburb has such a different cultural diversity, and it's just there's so much you can talk about for our own. So if you were to look at our own selves, you know, we'd have a look at, you know, our own backgrounds and what languages do we speak, and we can talk to each other about that. So we can talk to each other about, you know, our cultural background and our migration story, for example. All of us have a certain story in Australia. For me, I come from a migrant background, I guess, where I come from an Italian background and a Slovenian background. So the Italians came into Australia after World War II. So they've been here for about 70 years or so and have contributed in different ways, but have also had different challenges. Same with the Slovenian community. So I like to learn about my own background. And I think that's also part of diversity and storytelling, is to know your own background and some of the gaps in our story and how to recognize those gaps, but also try to fill those gaps by researching as well. So, so I guess it's a very interesting question you ask, because it's sort of got that diversity, equity, inclusion space within employment and the roles we have, but also in our own selfhood. Yeah.
I love that explanation that you gave, seriously, because you're right. There's the, I guess, the professional definition of it. There's the politically charged definition of it. And then there's the, well, I mean, almost there's the reality of it, that we're all different and we all have our own uniquenesses, like you said, you know. And were you born in Australia, or did you migrate in, or was it your family that migrated in 70 years ago? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, my family. I was born here, so I'm like second generation Italian, Slovenian, Australian. Yeah. Okay. So
I was thinking about my background a bit too, and my part of my family. Let's see, they would have migrated to America within the last 100 years. So I don't know exactly the right year, but I think I would be a third generation then. But then part of the other family, you know how they all come together. It's like I've got part family from Finland and another family from Ireland, but they came out in the 1800s, and then some from France. So it's kind of and England too, actually. So it's like they all just married each other. But it is kind of interesting. And you know what? My great uncle, actually, who unfortunately passed on a few years ago, but he did so much research dating all the way back into the 1600s on the genealogy. And it was so fascinating to hear who I'm related to and, you know, where we all came from and some of that stuff. And interestingly enough, and this is something you don't hear very often from a white person, but most of my family were slaves in the past. But in Europe, they were slaves. And so there's a lot of positive and a lot of negative out there about the word diversity. And I think, you know, one of the things that I love that I try to use is, am I respecting the next person regardless? And I use that word regardless. Doesn't matter what they look like, doesn't matter where they come from, doesn't matter their past, who they are, what they've been, what they've done, right? Am I respecting that person? And I feel like if you can do that, then you've achieved diversity. Because if that person, like you said earlier, needs a wheelchair ramp to gain access, that's respecting them. They need that. I love the word respect. And I feel like if respect is used in diversity, then it's a win-win. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And then it sort of makes me think about, the way in which we connect with each other and communicate, but also think about what people need is what you mentioned.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking more from a professional perspective as well, like when you're working in an organization and you have people that have different needs, that relates to respect and helping people to be their authentic self and to be safe.
Yeah.
But when we talk about respect, like you say, like naturally speaking to people, we have a lot of unconscious bias, but in the field of diversity and inclusion, it's moving from unconscious bias to conscious inclusion. So how do we become more conscious in our prejudices? Because we all have different prejudices and we all have ways that we categorize people and ways that we sort of make sense of the world based on our life experiences and our past interactions with diverse communities. We can sometimes come up with unconscious bias or, prejudices. So how do we talk about those prejudices as well, and in a way that we can bring them to the surface? Because like our past experiences shape our attitudes.
Totally.
And I think that we all have that. So I like to have these kind of conversations. I guess we've all heard people have conversations perhaps that are stereotyping to people. And I've caught myself stereotyping as well. Yeah. Like, for example, if I've traveled somewhere and I'll be like, oh, those people are so nice, and I'll just bunch everyone in the same category. So I've got to be more aware of how I bunch people.
Interesting.
So,
I would have never thought of it like that, where you're paying a compliment, to a quote group of people, but you're right. You're still stereotyping. It's like, okay.
Yeah. I think it's called essentialism. I lived in Egypt for a year and I traveled around the Middle East, and that really shaped the way I saw the Arab world, for example, because like living in Australia and being in the Australian education system, you don't really hear a lot about the Arab world or Asia, for example. You're sort of educated more from a Western European perspective. And so traveling around Asia and the Middle East, it really did help me to challenge the way that I think about the world. And I think every time we mix with different cultures, it's really helped me to challenge my own prejudices and the way that I see the world. And that's why I love travel. And that's why I love intercultural dialogue. And when I talk to people from different faith backgrounds or cultural backgrounds, it really makes me think about how I've been raised and some of the prejudices and unconscious bias that I have. And I studied Islamic studies, and it also helped me understand a different faith, and that I've been raised from the Catholic tradition. When you study other languages and other faiths, you kind of like can compare and contrast the way that you've been raised. Yeah, it's exciting to me. And it helps me to shape who I am as well, and come up with, have I been conditioned, or where do I gravitate towards? Where do I feel more natural in the world, rather than it being placed upon me, I think. And of course, Australia is a secular, it does have Christian influences and of course, perhaps more of a European influence, but we live in a secular world and we have the ability to kind of explore where we feel we most belong, or we feel more natural. So these are the kind of conversations I like to have in my work as well. So, when people, when we talk about your own background and your own awareness of where you're from, often people don't know, and then we kind of come up with this idea that perhaps they need to do a bit more research or ask a few more questions.
It's interesting you're bringing up all these different backgrounds, because you're right. There's different ways of looking at it. I was going to add to when I said respect, that word. I also think love needs to be included in that, and then also valuing someone as a human being, also needs to be included in that too. But when you brought up that we all have different backgrounds, and like, for example, somebody gets pulled over by the police for speeding, they may think all police are terrible, even though that's not true. They may think that because that's an experience they had. You brought, that experience shapes our prejudices or our thought processes. The faith backgrounds, this was another conversation I was having recently in regards to Christianity, for example. There's the faith side, and then there's the cultural side. If you look at the Bible, for example, let's just take that as an example. And the faith side, and that's what's being taught. The cultural side, that's just what's being referenced to. It's not saying that culture in that day and age was a good thing. It could have been, but maybe not, right? It depends on, so if they were off doing horrible things to people, that's not an example of what we should do, and so separating those two things, I think, was kind of interesting too, because you can have a faith belief, but that's not necessarily congruent with the cultural belief. Like I saw this a lot, especially in America, over the last 3 years. There were a lot of political issues that went on with COVID, racism, other things like that. And people were taking whatever faith they believed and they were mixing it with their political beliefs and making it one. And that's just not the way that it should be, because your faith belief is different than your political belief. I mean, it can influence one another kind of thing, or it can, you can work together with them, but they're not the same thing, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And so I don't want to get into too many examples because that's not what the show's about. But the whole point was, it's even separating your faith beliefs with your cultural beliefs too. I don't know. I don't know all the faiths in the world, but I know that with Christianity, for example, prejudice is not one of the qualities, if you know what I mean. Culturally, you might have that, but from that's I'd like to separate those things too.
Absolutely. And I think that ideologies and the way that we think about the world and our beliefs and our values are certainly part of diversity. And you can get into really interesting conversations around values.
Absolutely.
And, sometimes we have conflicting values or different perspectives on things. Some people, obviously, have different beliefs and values around relationships and marriage or, family or gender, for example, or people may have different values around, I've been in the aged care space, or even different values around disability. Disability, which I found very challenging in some ways for my own values. So it's not about trumping over other people's values. It's about saying, you see that from your perspective and I disagree with you, for example, or I agree with you, or I partially agree with you. Rather than saying you're wrong, it's about saying, I really don't feel comfortable with that, or I totally feel comfortable with that, right? So, for example, in the aged care space, people have different ideas about death and dying and how we can understand it to be, or how that we understand elders in our community or older people. And there were different debates around how we treat older people in certain systems and societies, like the idea that we live in a youth-centered society rather than a society where elders are respected.
Yeah.
So that was spoken about in the diversity. That's especially amongst Aboriginal people in some communities, like they respect the elders, and in my culture, you respect elders, and in Chinese cultures as well, we spoke about that.
Yeah.
Communities where it's almost as if older people are invisible in our societies. So that, there's those kind of values that we reflect upon. When we talk about disability, like some people used to see disability as a curse, and that was something I totally disagree with, because I see people with disability as part of diversity, that we all have diverse and beautiful and unique ways of being. So, there's different way, and like, it's not trying to make people feel ashamed of who they are or feel that they're wrong, but it's having conversations where we have respectful and raw conversations as well. Yeah. And so when you talk about ideology, it's very complex and it can be very political, and that's how wars start sometimes, through this kind of stuff. We can also bring peace building opportunities. So it's really, really quite, like, you could go on about this topic for a very long time.
Oh, yeah.
It's not always rainbows and butterflies.
No.
It can be conflicting as well.
It's true. I've got one friend. He and I typically are on opposite sides of beliefs. It's interesting. And yet we're really, really good friends. We very much respect each other, and we never fight about it. We just have conversations. And honestly, I think most people, I'm surprised. I'm actually very surprised that he and I can have these conversations about even very highly emotional political issues that will be polar opposites on, but yet we're not mad at each other. We're not yelling. We're not screaming. We're not trying to convince each other. It's just discussing it, understanding each other's viewpoints. And then it's kind of the whole, okay, so how do we, not just the two of us, but how do we collectively move forward with something like this and, make the world better kind of thing. It's fascinating. I can't have that conversation with probably 99% of people, but it can be done. I guess that's the cool thing.
That's a really interesting example because you're sort of able to hopefully be your authentic selves.
Totally. Yeah, 100%.
You know? So you can be your authentic selves and I kind of agree to disagree and
still respect each other.
Yeah, well, I certainly have that experience in my own family. I have a lot of debates around the table and different viewpoints on sexuality or, you know, what's happening in the news or and we can sort of certainly voice our opinion and then still love each other.
That's good. That's so good. And especially with family, I feel like that's hard sometimes because usually they don't love each other after that, which is sad.
I've been raised in a family where we have robust and open discussions around politics and what's happening in the world, and often we don't have the same point of view, and there's that intergenerational difference as well. So, you know, some people being more conservative than others, and it can be hilarious. I should actually film one of our family discussions.
There you go.
Yeah.
You could start your own show. Like that would probably be very, very, very entertaining.
Yes, it would be very, very entertaining. I appreciate it because we can have our opinion. I think that's important.
Yeah.
And agree to disagree. I think sometimes like people just want that stimulation as well. It's like,
People get their kicks off that kind of thing. That's so true. Well, no, and this is interesting because I know you're a huge proponent for self-awareness. Like you love that. We're talking about that right now, just in conversations and stuff like that. Do we have self-awareness when we're engaging in this kind of conversation? So when we're talking and when we're engaging in diverse communities, when we're providing a Native experience, are we self-aware in ourselves, in our businesses, our organizations, whatever? What are your thoughts on the whole self-awareness piece? Because obviously it's hugely important, but what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's an essential skill when working with diverse communities, and it's been recognized. If you look at peak bodies that are promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, you know, consulting or this kind of space around the world, and benchmarking what are the skills associated with cross-cultural communication and intercultural dialogue, self-awareness has always been mentioned as an essential skill. So it's not just a fluffy thing, like self-awareness. It's actually a skill.
Yeah.
I think workplaces would benefit from engaging in conversations around self-awareness as it relates to our own heritage, the way that we see power and privilege, our power positions in relationships as well, and how we can bring about some of our biases.
Mm-hmm.
And these are sensitive conversations to have, but they can be facilitated. It can be one-on-one or it can be group facilitation. But it could also be what triggers us or, you know, what resonates with us in the workplace, but also in our relationships. So self-awareness was something I had to study in my social work degree as a skill in working with communities. And I really do value the idea of it, being in spaces where we can. It needs to be a safe space because it can be vulnerabilities.
Yeah. People
can feel vulnerable, but it could be any way that you need to do that. It could be even just journaling, you know.
Yeah.
It could be speaking to a friend, but it's that, you know, it's that, I got into it, you know, it could be reflecting. It's about reflective practice or self-reflection that is core to social work as a profession. But I've really valued that kind of way of being in my own work and I do quite a bit of reflection myself and things I need to improve on or what triggered me. Why did I respond that way to things? It doesn't always have to have a solution, you know, but it could just be, that happened and why did I respond that way? And why am I angry today? Or why am I tired? Why do I need to, even self-care is important. So there's no answer to it. It's not like a traditional thing to do in a workplace where you need an outcome or you need a KPI.
Sure.
It's more just a skill to have to help reduce those barriers that might happen around relationships in particular. So, yeah.
So important. Yeah, no, I fully agree with it. I think it's, I like the idea of reflecting. Not too much though, because I think some people can get stuck in their heads. You know, if you're talking about, I don't think anybody can be too self-aware, but you can get too obsessed, I guess that's the word I'm looking for. Too obsessed with what you're doing wrong that then you are triple guessing yourself and then you stop acting because you're afraid of what you might do, that kind of thing. But what you said was excellent. The problem is that most of the people that aren't self-aware think they are. That's where it becomes difficult. So how do you convince somebody to kind of say, hey, let's take a step back and, let's analyze the situation and see kind of why we got to this point. So I like what you said there, but definitely thinking about it, being aware of what you're saying. Like you said, it may not have a solution in the moment. It may be a learning experience that takes time, but definitely to understand how you're coming across and how you're affecting people. And again, it goes back to the whole idea. Are you valuing the next person? Are you respecting them? Are you trying to anyway? You may not, you may make a mistake, but is your intention to value and respect that person, which leads to diversity and inclusion, all that good stuff. Yeah, that's really good. I have a question on if you have a crazy, wonderful, funny, beautiful moment throughout your career or your travels or your work or anything like that that's just stuck with you. It's that one story that you share with a lot of people. You just go, oh, this is why I love what I do.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. I was traveling around Syria. I was on a bus and I was traveling by myself. And for some reason, like in some cultures, people feel like when they see a traveler, they have to help them. And so I had a family look at me on the bus, and it was like a mother and father and 3 children, actually. They looked at me and they said, oh, where are you from? And, welcome to Syria. I was like, oh, thank you. And they wouldn't let me go. Like they took me for a walk and showed me around the town and everything. It was so generous of them. And they wouldn't let me go to the point where 2 hours later, I was celebrating the grandmother's birthday in their home.
Wow.
And I was like,
your family now.
Yeah, I was in the family photo, like in the background.
Funny.
The children were giving me all their clothes and doing my hair.
Oh, wow.
They would not let me go. And I was like, oh, thank you so much, but I need to go back to the hotel, like where I actually booked my accommodation. And they felt so bad for me that they wouldn't let me go. But I was trying to tell them that I'm fine, like I'm okay to get back. But then they actually stayed with me for 3 days and would not let me go, the whole family.
Oh, wow.
So I ended up being part of the family. For some reason, that story really got to me because traveling around the Middle East, it was very much like that. And there was another situation where I went on a tour in the desert in the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, and there was a sheikh who was like a religious leader in that area where it's very remote. It's more like the Bedouin community. He took me and my friend on a 4-day desert tour.
Wow.
And he did not charge us for anything, not even for petrol. I said, so sorry, but can we please contribute to petrol or give you some money for food? And he said, absolutely not. I cannot take it. You are a traveler. You are a guest.
Oh, wow.
And I have a duty to support you and make you feel safe.
Oh, that's so cool.
And those kind of things really inspire me as well, because it's like, that doesn't happen all the time.
No.
Yeah, like he was so generous, and it's a cultural thing too. I guess those stories stand out for me in my travels. But in my career, I used to work on a project encouraging young people to have a voice on radio. I worked with people with intellectual disability, young people, and we got them on radio. And that's a good program that I like to mention because they were often just sitting bored, at school, and they weren't accepted a lot of the time. Link them to radio training and to link them to skills where they can interview people and tell stories that they want to tell. Often it was just like football, what happened in the football results. That's what they want to talk about. Or they want to talk about like their PlayStation console and like the different consoles. Or they wanted to talk about, whatever they wanted to talk about. But I really was happy to support that program where they could have a voice. So I guess that's what I wanted to mention there. Yeah.
That's neat. Oh, I love this. I mean, I've loved hearing just your experiences and your stories and your perspectives, and I really appreciate you sharing this. I always like to ask the question at the end, as we're wrapping up and stuff, what kind of tips and advice that you would want us to walk away with, and how we provide a truly native experience, both personally and professionally. And I mean, we've talked about that quite a bit today. But anything you want to just leave us with that we should remember? If we forget everything else in this episode, which I know we won't, but if we did, what's the one thing you want us to remember?
There's not one culture that's superior to another. Even though we might be influenced by the storytelling and narrative of a certain culture, such as people that speak English, for example, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only way to be And that's not the only way we should be. And so I encourage people to explore different stories, explore different cultures. And in Melbourne in particular, if you're living in Melbourne, you've got such an opportunity to go and explore different stories and different food or different traditions and festivals that are out there, because Melbourne is the city of festivals. And so go out there and speak to people.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be best friends with everyone or have friendships with everyone. If you have friendships, that's great, because we know that friendships promote cultural diversity and increase our cultural capital. Even just talking to people, learning or reading. So I guess I encourage education in this sort of space and really connecting with people, not just reading books either, but really going out and connecting with people in different ways.
I love it. Lisa, thank you so much. This was awesome. I really appreciate it. It was a fun conversation, but it was so important too. And I loved how you said inspiring. It was inspiring. This conversation was, and I really appreciate your time.
Thanks with you. You're inspiring to me too. And the fact that you've, delved into your own background, it's really interesting as well. So thank you for sharing that.
Lisa Trabuzio, co-create facilitator with Lexigo and also manager at Lotus Consulting. Thank you so much for listening and joining us today. We would love to hear from you. Send us your questions and comments on email, nx@lexigo.com. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And remember, always strive for authenticity and embrace the power of Native experiences.